The cop's hand was already resting on his belt when I started laughing. Yeah, laughing. Not the nervous kind, but the kind that bursts out when you realize the whole damn world just flipped upside down in your favor. A few seconds earlier, the HOA president, Delilah Whitmore, was standing on her $1 million deck across the lake, screaming that I was trespassing and that people like me don't belong here. She thought she was watching a criminal about to get hauled away in cuffs. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned the very water her fancy neighborhood was built around. The entire lake, every drop, and I was about to prove it. 3 months earlier, I was just a tired 52-year-old electrician from Denver named Rex Thornton, trying to fill the quiet my wife left behind when cancer took her. Every corner of our old house smelled like her lavender perfume mixed with hospital antiseptic. It was torture just to breathe. When I got a letter about an estate auction from my late uncle, Jasper, some recluse who'd lived on a Montana lake for 40 years, I figured maybe it was fate's way of giving me a new start. The property came with a little cabin, 3 acres of land, and something called territorial water rights. I didn't know what that meant, but I had Clara's life insurance money and no one left to spend it on, so I took the risk. When I drove up there, the air felt clean, real, like something worth starting over for. I won the auction at a good price. Thought I'd just inherited a quiet slice of heaven. What I didn't realize was that the lake, my lake, was surrounded by Pine Ridge Estates, a luxury HOA where the cheapest home sold for over $1 million. They'd built their paradise around a resource they didn't even own. My first week there was peaceful. I fixed up the dock my uncle had built with his bare hands, breathing in cedar and mountain air. Until one morning, a white SUV pulled up, and out stepped her, Delilah Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of Pine Ridge. Blonde hair, yoga outfit, clipboard like a sword. She didn't even knock, just marched down to my dock and said, "Welcome to the community. I'm the HOA president, and we need to discuss your violations." Violations. That word tasted like poison. She read off a list: dock length, color, railing height, all nonsense. I told her I bought this property at a public auction, clear title, and didn't need anyone's permission to hammer a plank. Her smile turned cold enough to freeze the lake. "We have standards here, Mr. Thornton. Property values depend on compliance." That was the moment I realized Delilah wasn't just another nosy neighbor. She was a tyrant with a homeowners association behind her. A few days later, she came back with some guy in a polo shirt who claimed he was a state environmental inspector. Said his name was Dale. He looked nervous, like he'd rather be anywhere else. They started poking around my shoreline, measuring things, taking pictures. But something felt off. The truck he arrived in said, "Dale's Fine Furniture," on the side. Yeah, furniture. So, while he was pretending to inspect, I called the Department of Environmental Quality. They'd never heard of him. When I put the call on speaker, Dale dropped his clipboard, sprinted to his truck, and peeled out like his life depended on it. Delilah just folded her arms and said, "You're clearly intimidating official personnel. Community standards supersede state regulations." That's when I knew I was in for war. That night I called a lawyer to double-check my deed, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. He called back the next morning, sounding almost excited. "Mr. Thornton, you didn't just buy lakefront property. You bought the water rights. The entire lake's water sources originate from your land." I didn't fully grasp it then, but that line, that simple statement, was the first crack in Delilah's empire. A week later, she sent letters around the neighborhood calling an emergency meeting to discuss my illegal occupation of community waters. She wanted all 47 ohms to contribute to a lawsuit to buy me out. I hadn't even finished fixing my roof, and this woman was mobilizing an entire army. Then came Garrett Flynn, a local surveyor who showed up at my door holding coffee and a stack of maps. "Heard you stirred the hornet's nest," he said. Turns out, he'd been fighting Delilah for years, too. When we spread my deed and the old survey documents on the table, we both froze. The underground springs feeding the entire lake, all of them, started beneath my property. In legal terms, I controlled the flow of every drop that filled Pine Ridge Estate's so-called private lake. When I told Delilah over the phone I wasn't selling, she laughed like a comic book villain. Then, overnight, the vandalism started. First, my dock ropes were sliced. Then someone painted "Trespasser" across the planks in sloppy red letters. Garrett helped me install motion cameras. And 2 nights later, we caught the culprit, her teenage son, Bradley, cutting my ropes again while talking on the phone. "Yeah, Mom, I'm finishing the dock. You said $2,000, right?" The next morning, I confronted him at the local coffee shop. His face went pale when I played the recording. He broke down completely, told me Delilah had done this to 3 other families before me. She'd use harassment, fines, and vandalism until they sold cheap. Then her real estate company would help resell the homes. It was a racket, and she'd been running it for years. That night, I sat on the edge of my broken dock, the lake dark and quiet. For the first time, I felt defeated. I'd come here to escape grief, not invite more of it. I asked myself if Clara would want me to fight or just walk away. But then I thought about Uncle Jasper, this stubborn old man who'd lived out here alone, guarding this land for decades. He'd left me more than a cabin. He'd left me leverage. I wasn't going to waste it. So, I went into Jasper's basement for the first time. The place smelled like tobacco and dust. Filing cabinets lined the walls, filled with decades of documents. And buried in there, I found a letter from 1994. Jasper had written to a surveyor saying he still held the territorial water grant from 1887, legally controlling every underground spring feeding Pine Lake. He'd chosen never to enforce it, but I could. I hired a water rights attorney named Maya Blackstone, a sharp woman with silver hair and zero patience for nonsense. When she read the papers, she looked up at me like she'd just found gold. "Mr. Thornton, this is absolute. You own their water, all of it, if you wanted. You could shut it off tomorrow and it'd be perfectly legal." She laid out 3 options. Nuclear, charge them millions in back fees. Diplomatic, charge monthly rates going forward. Or strategic, use the leverage to force reform and expose her corruption. I chose option 3. I didn't want revenge, I wanted justice. But Delilah wasn't done. She showed up one evening with a thick envelope and a fake smile. $75,000, she said. Cash from the HOA emergency fund. You can move somewhere more appropriate. I recorded everything. When I asked if the money was from community funds, she said yes without blinking. That was all I needed. The next morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door, said Delilah had filed reports claiming I threatened her and several neighbors. I invited him in, played the recording of her bribery attempt, and showed him the video of her son vandalizing my dock. He shook his head. "Mr. Thornton, she's done this before. We've got 17 false reports on record. I'll be in touch." That's when the real madness started. Flyers appeared on cars calling me a dangerous, unstable widower. Anonymous calls, slashed tires, drive-bys. She was trying to paint me as the town lunatic. But Maya and I documented everything. And then came the night I'll never forget. I woke up to the sound of my basement door creaking open. I grabbed my bat and went down. And there she was, Delilah herself, crouched in front of Jasper's filing cabinet, crowbar in hand. When I turned the light on, she froze like a raccoon caught in headlights. "Looking for something?" I asked. Her lips trembled, but she couldn't speak. She ran out into the dark before I could even finish dialing 911. The next day, she called a public meeting at the Pine Ridge Clubhouse, her final stand. She invited the media, probably thinking she could humiliate me. The whole town showed up, half of them glaring at me like I was the villain. Delilah stood at the front with her slides and speeches about protecting the community. She called me a trespasser, a threat, a blackmailer. People even clapped. When she finished, I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. I opened the old leather folder and held up Jasper's 1887 deed. "This," I said, "is the original territorial grant that created Pine Lake. It gives my property exclusive rights to every spring that feeds your lake." You could have heard a pin drop. Then Maya walked up beside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this isn't about harassment. This is about your president stealing from you." She hit play on the speaker, and Delilah's voice filled the room. 75,000 cash from the HOA fund. Gasps, whispers, then the video of Bradley vandalizing my dock. Delilah lost it, screaming that it was fake, that I was manipulating everyone. But the neighbors had already turned on her. The sheriff, same deputy who'd visited me before, stepped forward, pulled out the cuffs, and said, "Delilah Whitmore, you're under arrest for embezzlement and filing false reports." As they led her away, her perfect hair was a mess, her voice cracking as she shouted about unfair laws and outsiders ruining everything. I just stood there, silent, watching the woman who thought she owned the world crumble under the weight of her own lies. For a long moment, the clubhouse was dead quiet. 40-something homeowners staring at me, finally realizing I wasn't their enemy. I wasn't the crazy widower with revenge fantasies. I was just the guy who bought a cabin and refused to be bullied off his own land. I didn't say much after that, just walked out into the cool night air. Toward the dock Jasper built. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, calm again, like it had been waiting for the truth to surface. You know, people talk about power like it's about money or control. But sometimes, real power is just standing your ground when the world tells you to move. A lesson. If someone tries to rule over you with fake authority, learn the rules better than they do, and let the truth do the talking.